worse version of these. It's by Faders, which I think is based out of Spain. There's a bunch of issues that I have with these. First off, it's the same thing where it's got one side of it that pivots against the other side. One side that has like this lever, which is in the center, pivots, and then there's like two plates that seal that side in. The big problems with this, first off, this aperture is like super, super thin. This thing is mostly a descender. Also, it's meant for going down. It's not meant for like climbing and lead climbing, but people just started using it for that for some unknown reason. One of the other big beefs that I have with this thing is, again, they didn't officially re-release the blade device, but if you look right here, you'll notice that this is an oblong aperture right here. It's like it's an oval as opposed to circular. The reason why that is problematic is if you've got this closed and it's locked up, and you've got a carabiner that is the cross section of like the cross section of the bar of the carabiner is roughly circular, then the way it works is this thing, in the event of a fall, the way it locks is just like the other one, where if you tilt the device down, you can feed slack, and it'll pop back up when it engages in the locks. The problem with this is that, again, if you have a thicker carabiner with sort of like an oblong profile, and you put it into a oblong aperture for one of these devices, what can end up happening is that when you're setting this thing up, it can actually get rotated and then get stuck in a down position. And what that means is that if your climber falls, not only will it not lock, it will literally be impossible for you to get it to lock until you can like reverse it back out of that position. And so it's like it's basically super dangerous if you're using the wrong carabiners with it. And then they just sort of discreetly made another version of this with a bigger aperture. But these devices are kind of junky, so I don't really recommend them. Real quick, Virgo. These things are great. It's just another type of belay device, and they're just good belay devices. It's like it's very similar to the cinch. It's almost the exact same as the cinch. It just has a much bigger handle, which makes lowering easier, and it's got sort of a more ergonomic design. But they're awesome. If you like them, you are in good company. I do too. Next few are fairly, they're not the best. There's this guy, which is a tray, a serious tray. These guys are out of business right now. What the concept is with these, and I won't dwell on it for too long, but what the idea is that this is one of the first belay devices that you could clip into without unclipping from your carabiner. So I got my carabiner, it's locked up. I can like pull this trigger down here and open up my my device. I can load the rope in it again and lock it up without unclipping my carabiner. So I have zero chance of dropping this thing ever if I'm multi-pitch climbing or whatever. Basically, you take in slack exactly as per normal. And again, this thing tilts up and then uses a spring mechanism to assisted lock. The thing is with these guys is, again, they're just not very good at assisted locking. So first off, if your climber falls, in the event of a fall, what'll happen is that spring goes up, right? When that spring gets driven up, it's sort of hard to demonstrate. When that spring right here gets driven up, the bar, this cross piece, squeezes that top rope and your climber stops. Main problems with this, there are a bunch. First off, the aluminum that they use for this is like not the best. And so the wear on this aluminum was significant, and that is like the only thing that you're trusting to prevent you from falling. Second off, the spring mechanism with this also, like if that gets too stiff, then it won't lock. If it gets too loose, then it locks all the time. And for whatever reason, they stopped. selling those. This is a Zappamat, which is another one by Edelrid. The green ones are from Edelrid. This is like another needlessly complicated one. It's building on the same idea. You clip in here, you press this button to release the bottom. This is made out of steel, which is a significant improvement. But the way you clip in, again, you push through like this and clip it closed. If your climber falls, then it will lock up, and this one locks up. It does a much better job of locking up. And then you lower down by pressing down on this lever. If you want it to lock less, it's got this other green button. So you press this in and it creates more friction. It makes the spring more rigid, which makes this thing lock less often. Main thing that I'd say is the term assisted locking. They call these assisted locking, not like auto locking, just because they want to stress the concept that you're not just taking your hand off the rope. Both those last two belay devices, you need to have a hand on the rope or they'll just slowly let you go. So very important. Last couple that I'll go over, or last few that I'll go over are this family. We've got the SRC, the original Smart Belay, Smart 2.0, which is like basically the same thing. The Mega Jewel, which is another Edelrid one. Smart Alpine, which is basically like two Smart Belays glued together, and a smaller version of the Smart Alpine. What all of these things have in common, first off, they're cheap, which is not a bad thing, or they're inexpensive, since cheap has negative connotations with it, which I don't intend in this instance. And the way that they work is you put the rope into them, you clip your carabiner through, and in the event of a fall, what ends up happening is the carabiner gets sucked up, and when it gets sucked up, it wedges the rope. It wedges the rope, so the rope gets squeezed right here in between the carabiner and a pin on this side, and that catches the climber. With the Smart Belay, they're awesome in terms of climbing with them because you just can hook your thumb underneath here and feed slack. The only downside with these things, my only gripe with Smart Belays, is that if you have this hanging on your harness like this, when you're climbing, every once in a while it'll just catch on like an edge as you're moving up past it and just like completely stop you, which is like really annoying if you don't see it coming. Those are all good belay devices though. They're a little bit more work than a Gree or something that's like more self-locking. But they're great and they're inexpensive. I think the Smart Belays are like $30 or something. Lastly is the Click Up and the Alpine Up. Click Up, I think these are both Italian, unless I am mistaken. The way these work is basically sort of like a combination of how the Smart Belay works, and then it's got this little internal paddle. So it's got actually, you can't really, I'm sure you won't be able to see it very well, but on the inside right here, my finger is pressing on this little paddle. It's like a pinball machine paddle. There's an archaic concept for you. Pinball machines. Anyway, what the concept is that you've got your belay device, you're belaying, all of a sudden your climber falls, and you hear that click. What that click is the belay device moving from having your carabiner at the bottom down here, and it follows that track and goes up around to that top layer. To lower somebody down, you twist it, and your climber will lower down. And then you can belay like this, but it'll stay fairly close to locked up. And then you can slide it back down to the bottom, and it won't lock up as frequently. The Alpine Up is like, it's just needlessly complex. It is, if you clip in, and I'm not going to like waste a bunch of time going into this, but if you clip in here, then it acts like a click up, like the thing we just covered. If you clip in here, then it acts like an ATC XP, where it's got these little ridges right here. If you clip in here and here, then it can set up like an auto blocking system, and there's like a couple different ways of doing that. And again, when you do this, you can similarly load it upside down and belay from the top. One last thing is that this guy right here is a brake release lever. So should you load this guy up, you load it up, you clip in, this thing locks up, and so my climber is all locked up. To lower them down, I can then pull this lever, and that alleviates stress, so I can pull down and then have the rope slide through. But again, these things are they're not something you should pay for, basically. And anybody who has these, there's not really a reason that they're better than anything else, other than the fact that they're super complicated and confusing. They've got this little paddle on them right here also, but all in all, they're not great. Thus concludes our review of many different belay devices. Hopefully you guys liked that. And the very last thing that I wanted to talk about was the concept of munter hitches. A munter hitch is a knot. It's easy to tie. All you have to do is take a loop, make a 270-degree turn, and then fold that so you're trapping the vertical loop, and then clip through both of those sideways strands. So again, take the rope, 270-degree turn, so you're making like a plus sign with the rope, with the vertical line on the outside, and then you just fold it sideways to trap that vertical strand, and you clip in and clip into your harness. This is a knot that you can use as a belay device. It'll kink your rope up, it'll coil your rope a lot, but if you drop your belay device or you don't have one for whatever reason, you can use this. These are like super useful. They're like really awesome. Main characteristics here, you don't want to have your fingers too close to them because it can like break your fingers if you suck it through. But again, these actually create more friction than an ATC. The only difference is they lock upwards as opposed to locking down. But again, in a pinch, they're an awesome knot, and they're really good for self-rescue and belay escapes and like all sorts of other applications. So if you're going to only learn a few knots, figure eight follow through, overhand on a bite, clove hitch, munter hitch, you can do most things with those 4 knots. And it's good to know more things. But so one more time. You make 270-degree turn, fold it around, and clip in like so. And then the knot is, it'll flip over if you run it in opposite directions, just like so. I demonstrated this for you, but unfortunately there's just not really a good place to demonstrate this type of